We're always looking for stuff that's happening. And so we serve so many different business models, right? We serve SaaS, we serve e-commerce, we serve affiliate sites, Amazon FBA, agencies, like we've sold all of these things, right? And there's always some kind of turbulence or new thing that is happening in pretty much every one of these business models every week. Like SEO has been a big one, as I'm sure you two know, with like SGE and AI overviews and Google going a bit schizophrenic and all the SEOs are worried. So a lot of news lately has been about that. So we always try to keep people up to date. And the goal is like, look, you're an entrepreneur. You're running this crazy e-commerce store. Like you have a million things you got to worry about. Let us be the person that finds the most important stuff for you.
Every B2B marketing team faces challenges when they have to do more with less. Should you build skills internally? Should you find a freelancer? Should you search for the right agency? This is Tech Qualified, a podcast for the scrappy B2B marketing teams. In each episode, Meredith Metsker, a senior content leader at a tech company, and Justin Brown, a marketing agency owner, uncover how marketing teams generate qualified opportunities with limited resources. Every episode helps you get one step closer to winning over your ideal customers.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech Qualified. I'm Justin Brown, and I'm joined by my co-host, Meredith Metzger.
Hey, everyone.
This show is brought to you by New North. New North specializes in working with B2B marketers who have to do more with less. When you partner with New North, you turn your small, scrappy marketing team into a growth engine. There are lots of things that I want to cover today with today's guest, from his conference strategy to leveraging global talent. But where I really want to start is the fact that he has built a newsletter to 118,000 active subscribers. A good nurture and newsletter strategy is a great approach for anyone trying to get the word out on their business, what you're saying, doing, etc. So I'd like to start there. I'd like to welcome Greg Elfrink to the show. Hey, Greg.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with your newsletter. So what inspired you to start This Week in M&A, and how did it begin?
Yeah, so This Week in M&A, I guess some background for the audience. What I do, I work in M&A, if the newsletter name didn't give it away. So we're a business broker for internet businesses. So what inspired it is that we used to have this thing that was called the Content Wrap-Up that went out every Friday. I was the content manager, and I just recently became the head of marketing at this point when I decided to change this. And what I noticed was like this content wrap-up, like no one cared because it was just our content that we were putting out every week. Like, I'm sure you guys have done this with your own guest posts, but like if you're guest posting a lot, right, you want your audience to see it, but you're probably writing about the same things over and over again. So your audience, like for us, is valuations, like how a business is valued, right? And like our audience just got bored of me writing the same article and sending it out to them like a million times, right? So I decided to switch it up. I was inspired by The Hustle, Morning Brew, and decided, you know what, let's do that for our little like weird niche of the internet. And got rid of the content wrap-ups. So now we do still promote some of our content, though only if it's unique now. We still do a lot of guest posting, of course, but we don't shove that to our audience because they already read the article a million times. So now we feature experts, insights, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, the metrics shot way up. So we were just talking about the metrics, right? Like I forget what they were with the content wrap-up, but they were significantly worse than they are now. Like now we have about 118,000 active subscribers, as you mentioned, and get like a little bit over 50% open rate. Usually it hovers between like 50 to 54%. And people love it. Like, well, I'm sure we'll talk about conferences soon, but like when I go around conferences, like this is the one thing that everyone always brings up. Like, dude, we love your newsletter. It's like the only newsletter I don't unsubscribe from, which in my industry, targeting entrepreneurs, especially digital marketing entrepreneurs, like that's a really big compliment because it's like one of the hardest people to market to.
Yeah, I talk about it a lot, actually. It's a very difficult segment to play in. And I want to actually ask you, Meredith. So when and this is actually good because we have 3 newsletters on this episode, so we can all compare and contrast. I think we all do them slightly differently. Meredith, how did your newsletter begin, and what does yours comprise of?
Yeah, well, at UConnect, the ed tech company I work for, we launched our newsletter in January of 2023. And it's always the same formula, as I think most newsletters are, but there's like an intro And the intro was written by me, like it's from my perspective. I treat it like I am sending a mass email to my friends. That's sort of the tone that I use. It's very casual, conversational.
I could hear you. I read it today. Yeah, your newsletter.
It sounds like me, right?
I'm like that. I can hear your voice in it when I read
That's my newsletter.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, there's like a little intro that kind of changes every week. And then we do this little like song of the week postscript at the end of the intro. And then there's usually 2 pieces of content. Typically it's one written piece of content, an article, and then one podcast episode because we have a podcast as well. And then there's a section at the end. It's like, we call it the Career Everywhere highlight because it's the Career Everywhere newsletter. And this goes out to career services professionals in higher ed. And so at the end, there's always a highlight of a career center at some college or university that's doing something really cool that kind of fits the theme of the newsletter. It's always a very short example, just something to give other career services professionals an idea of something they could easily implement. Like we typically want it to be something easily implementable. So it's pretty short and sweet. It's always that same template, but people have responded very well to it. Like we have over 1,600 subscribers, which is small compared to like Greg's audience, but for our
we're making for years, I had an unfair advantage on that front.
Yeah, and our audience is pretty niche. Like it's not the biggest audience ever, so 1,600 is pretty darn good. I'm excited about that and excited to hit 2,000 next. But I've had some similar feedback to you, Greg, where like at conferences, people will come up and they will be like, "Oh, we love your newsletter. We love your podcast. Is Meredith here?" Yeah. And so like we have this big conference coming up in early June. I talked about it in today's newsletter. And I was very much like, "Hey, I'm going to be there. I want to meet you. Come hang out," which is fun for me, but it's also good for the company too. Because it's like using me as bait a little bit because they feel like they know me after having read this newsletter for so long.
I have had very similar experiences to that. In fact, I'm probably going to get messages here again soon because we just started a media buying campaign. And right now it's all static images, but I'm going to be putting like videos of me back in the media campaign. And every time I do any kind of ad where like I'm in the video, I just start getting all these messages on LinkedIn and Facebook, like, "You're interrupting my gym workout, Greg." Because like I'm like pseudo the face of the company at this point. So like everyone reaches out to me for all the problems that I've got.
You're so popular.
Yes.
Nobody asks about me. Ours is slightly different. So we went down the path of what I tell people all the time they shouldn't do. And this goes back to what you were saying, Greg, is just such a competitive landscape. So I play in marketing services. I'm competing against the best marketers in the world in many cases because they are marketers who were like, "I'm so good at marketing that I'm going to go start my own company," whether it's MarTech, marketing services, what have you. And so you have to do things a little bit differently. So my clients are much more typical to like Meredith's background, ed tech, health tech, whatever it may be. I got a client in freight tech, a client in waste management tech. So what we did is we started a media entity, which has 11 podcasts that we own, this being one of them, Creative Operations, Direct with Karina and Taylor, Taking the Lead. There's a bunch of them. So ours is, and this is leading to my next question for both of you, because I'm curious, you were talking already a little bit about it, is the content that's in the newsletter. So for us, our newsletter is our stuff. Like we're already the media. So we're creating the shows. We do a wrap up of the shows, what episodes have come out this month. We do a monthly newsletter just for bandwidth issues. We're going to increase that. I think this month, we're starting to increase it to either every other week or weekly. But historically, it's been once a month, and we do a big monthly roundup of all of the content that we've released as our own thing. That to us is very important. I'm selling marketing services as our business is, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that later, Greg, just on a side note.
Yes, come on over.
We've been doing quite a bit of M&A here.
I'll hard sell you into selling your business with me.
Well, we're in an active buying cycle. Actually kicked off. Actually kicked off this morning. Sorry. Tangent. So I'm curious. So we do this thing that's very challenging. The only reason we're able to do it is because we have in-house production. So we're able to use our internal resources as part of our marketing effort. So that's like part of the investment that we're making in ourselves, into our marketing department as an organization. can borrow resources from the thing that we do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm curious, when it comes to the content in your newsletter, Greg, I'll start with you. Are you doing more of like wrap-up content from around the world of M&A? Is it, and I think you touched on it already a little bit, but I'd like you to dive a little bit deeper, maybe your process, what have you. Is it stuff that's coming out of the organization itself? Is it just you're scouring the internet? How do you go about getting the content for the newsletter?
The answer is yes to all of that.
Okay, good.
So, yeah, we have like crazy amounts of like Google alerts. We have some social intelligence software. I forget what we use, but there's a bunch out there nowadays that like will just bring up mentions when people say stuff. We have influencers we track. A lot of them are actually like really good friends of our brand because like we sold a lot of their businesses, so we made them millionaires. So that's always helpful when your product does that, right?
That keeps someone in your
yeah. So like we're always looking for stuff that's happening, and since we serve so many different business models, right? So like we serve SaaS, we serve e-commerce, we serve affiliate sites, Amazon FBA, agencies, like we've sold all of these things, right? And there's always some kind of turbulence or new thing that is happening in pretty much every one of these business models every week. Like SEO has been a big one, as I'm sure you two know, with like SG and AI overviews and Google going a bit schizophrenic and all the SEOs are worried. So a lot of news lately has been about that. So we always try to keep people up to date. And the goal is like, look, you're an entrepreneur. You're running this crazy e-commerce store. Like you have a million things you got to worry about. Let us be the person that finds the most important stuff for you. And if you want to read deeper, great. But like this is the things you need to know. So that's the curation side. And then the other side of it is, yeah, our own content too. So I think you and I talked about this, Justin, but I'm a big fan of what you're doing with a media play, because I think that's really smart. And I've always viewed that this in a similar vein with EF, like we have our YouTube channel, we have a podcast, we have a blog, though we don't post on the blog as much anymore as we're like moving more and more into like social and demand gen type of stuff. But yeah, so we'll put our own stuff in there too. And every now and then we'll come out with like a super thick like data report, like look at these multiples. These are the kind of deals people are getting. There's like super fascinating to our audience. And ironically, by curating, this like gives us a lot more time to actually do those and not just write another valuation article that they read a million times. So yeah, those are like the two strategies there. And we'll sometimes partner with other people too. So like we use the newsletter as like leverage to develop strategic partnerships with as well.
Yeah, for us, that was always a huge issue with our content is like my content that we're putting out is trying to appeal to the Merediths and the Gregs of the world, but we know inherently like I'm okay looking in the mirror and knowing that in many cases our ICP does not want to hear from another agency owner trying to tell them how to do their job. It's just the reality of it. Do I think I have good ideas? I do. But do the vast majority of people in my ideal customer profile want to hear from me? Maybe. But they also want to hear from their peers. And so that was the big play for us and why we did it is you talked about influencer marketing. We needed people who looked, acted, spoke like the ICP as our content that was coming out. It couldn't be like me, my business partner, our head of accounts, and our head of operations. And we're like, hey, listen, world, this is how you do marketing. Everyone's going to be like, shut up, guys. Like, you don't understand what I get internally at a B2B tech company on a small team with high pressure. Like, you don't get it. Maybe I don't, but that's why we wanted to go that route, is that we didn't feel that I think similarly to you going out there and getting things from influencers and different people, that we would be able to really be that voice of the customer, which takes me to you, Meredith, which I think you've done a great job of not being in higher ed necessarily, but it being a lot of your content. And I know you're a writer and you create the podcast. So what is your newsletter comprised of when it comes to the content?
Yeah, it's always like almost always content that we produce. So like that middle section, again, is typically 2 pieces of content. It's an article that I have written or maybe had help from a freelancer to write. And typically those articles are based off of podcast episodes. So it's kind of part of our distribution strategy is we'll do the biweekly podcast. We have all that really great content. And then we write articles based on what we're hearing in the podcast. So yeah, the It's typically an article, a podcast episode, again, produced by us. But it's not necessarily our perspective. Like, it's more of a journalistic take or like an approach to it. So it's based on interviews with subject matter experts in our target audience. So of course, like, people know that it's UConnect producing the content. And if there's a chance to plug our product or kind of weave it in, of course, we'll take that opportunity. But it's largely informational, educational content based on actual like subject matter expertise in the industry we're talking to.
Yeah, that's our most common playbook that we could. So, Greg, I don't know how much you do or don't know, but like, we started as a podcast agency, and then now we acquired a full service marketing agency. And for across the gamut, whether it is the podcast business or the full service agency side, we're running that Meredith offense in most cases. We're use podcast to generate written content, use all that content for a newsletter. That's our most typical approach, even though it's funny, it's not necessarily what we do for ourselves. Where I want to take this conversation, I'm curious, the two of you, and I'll start with you, Greg, is if you were one of these people that we work with, or you were Meredith's shoes before she started her newsletter, what would be some recommendations that you would give to another B2B company looking to grow a newsletter from, let's say, 0 to 1,000 subscribers today?
0 to 1,000. Yeah, I would assume the company already is making money. They have customers, right? Or
yeah. So
like from the very ground.
No, great question. So let's use like our most typical client that I work with, right? I work with 50 different B2B tech companies. They're most often not like super high growth injected $50 million from Alphabet. It's not that. It's usually like profitable business.
The more high stress startups.
Yeah, like profitable business. They're making money. They offer a product or service that has an area that exists. They're not out there. I'm not out there. I'm here to create a category. It's like, I have this good business. It's running. Marketing has happened either like word of mouth for a long time. We have a good partner program, something like that. But we're looking to grow. We need more marketing. And that means like a million different things to a million different people. Okay. So it's always fun to have those conversations. But like, we're looking to take we're looking to elevate marketing. We're looking to increase our content efforts, our paid media efforts. Maybe it's account-based marketing, what have you. And so they're like coming to us, very receptive, open to ideas, haven't done a whole lot usually. A blog that like fluctuates, maybe some paid campaigns. And they're like, and so let's say I say to them, okay, here's the first thing that I want to do. We're going to use the Meredith offense. We are going to have podcast, creating content. Well, now I'm like leading the witness here as to what I'm saying you should answer. So I'm going to go back. Okay, I gave you the company.
Yeah, sorry,
I gave you the company. You take it from there. Yeah, you kicked it back to me to get me going. All right, so you go, Greg. What?
Yeah,
so
sure.
You know the business profile, small team. What should they do?
Yeah, so the reason why I asked if they had customers is because like if you have customers, you already have a bit of an unfair advantage. So if you're recording your sales calls, right? What I would have said years ago, and what I'm about to say is a bit different with a little bit of a twist, is basically you as the marketer, as a content marketer especially, like you should listen to those sales calls on 2x speeds, because like most people think that in a company that marketing makes all the content, but really we make around 40%. And the vast majority of the content is actually made by sales. And I think marketing might actually be 30%. I'm forgetting the exact statistic. I think it was from a HubSpot study. But sales makes most of the content. And they do that on sales calls. And I always have joked that's dark content because they say it once. It was this golden nugget of wisdom that the customer loves. And then no one ever hears of it ever again, right? And I have a real life example of something I did at EF. This is years ago. So we had this situation back in the day where people would lose out on buying a business from us because someone else's bank wire hit first. And it might hit like a few minutes earlier, right? Like, well, that bank wire came in first. So the business is this guy. This is back when we were selling much smaller businesses. Obviously, this is not a big issue with like $15 million businesses. But so like our buyers were pretty pissed, right? Like they thought they got a business and now they realized they didn't. And our sales team always joke internally on Slack, like, oh, that one lost the wire race. And like no one in our audience even knew this was a thing. So I wrote a 500 or 800 word blog post. It wasn't heavy hitting at all in terms of word count, called How to Win the Wire Race. No SEO is going to rank me for anything on that. Or if it does, it's probably like ranking me for something I'm not talking about at that point. But I just educated my audience about it. And that one blog post led to hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it ended up being like $3 or $5 million as credit on file with us, because that was the solution on how to win the wire raise. Just send us the money before you buy a business and we can just like mark it off. And people did it. Like, who would have known that someone would just send you hundreds of thousands of dollars so they could beat out the competition, right? So that's one thing. As this company, I would go listen to all the sales calls. Now, the tweak I would do is, now that we have AI, just like take all those recordings, put it into a custom built ChatGPT, and start asking ChatGPT questions about those calls as well, or any other data intelligence tool you want to use. That speeds things up greatly. So that's the first thing. That gives you an unfair advantage. It starts giving you data, and the best content, whether it's B2C or B2B, is always data driven. Like, how can it be more data driven? And the more you can use your own data, the more unique you become. So another example we did that grew our newsletter, and this is something that someone can do to grow to 1,000 subscribers if they have data, is back in the day, my competitors would have these industry reports, and they would just scrape all the other broker websites, BizBuySell, Flippa, whatever, and they would make these industry reports. But the problem was, they only told you the list price. No one ever told you the sold price, because they didn't have that data, right? But we did, and we have more data than anyone because we have so many businesses. So I basically took what the industry standard report was, which was like pretty lame. It was like 12 slides in a Google slide deck. And I turned it into a 15,000 word like written report that went hardcore in depth and revealed the actual sales prices, right? And the real negotiations. It got so crazy that all my competitors stopped putting out an industry report. And even my competitors started referring to our report with their customers. Nice. So like, and that was a gated piece of content. So everyone always like does the debate about gated, ungated content, but I had people opting in like crazy to read that report, right? So you have something special like that. You have data, right? You have the unfair advantage. That's the hook to bring them into the newsletter. And then how you get the attention on it is like you start publishing little pieces of that data that's like a treat. Like, there's more if you come in, right? Across social media, maybe run a little tiny ad budget, like a retargeting campaign or something like that, or a brand awareness campaign, right? Just to get a little bit of juice. But that's what I would do. And of course, the classics like having a referral program in the newsletter, which for our audience, unfortunately, doesn't work very well because entrepreneurs are like really apathetic. Like, no, I'm not sharing this with anyone. I'm not doing anything you ask me to do, but I still love it. So it doesn't work as well in our niche, but I have friends who they grow greatly through those referral programs. So that's the thing, like unique data, a little bit of ads to juice it, some social content across the networks. And that would be my advice for you.
Nice. And I'm going to ask you the same question, Meredith, but I'm going to ask it slightly differently, which is that you recently did this. So what were the steps that you took to go, like, what was the order with which you did things? Was it podcast first and see that grow? Did it happen the same time? Was the newsletter first? You built a podcast out of it? Because you're running it as its own like little media hub on the UConnect website. So maybe if you could talk just a little bit about the evolution of that.
Yeah, we launched the podcast and the newsletter at the same time, actually, because we launched it all as part of a bigger, almost sub-brand. Again, it's called Career Everywhere. It's like, we call it the movement. It's like an approach to career services, or like modern career services. Yeah. And so we just officially launched everything in January of 2023. The podcast, a revamped section of the website, a like resources hub where our articles live. We got a guest columnist that worked in career services who was publishing for us every other week. And the newsletter came out at the same time because we knew we wanted a more frequent touch point, because the newsletter is weekly, everything else was bi-weekly. And we also wanted to create our own distribution engine. So we just created our own flywheel internally with content creation, content distribution. It all feeds into each other. In terms of like growing it, we are fortunate in that we have a very loyal customer base that sings our praises. They love us. And so we reached out to them first. We said, hey, we're launching this thing in January. Like, I think we started promoting it in December 2022. Said, hey, we're launching this newsletter in January. You can start subscribing now. Here's generally what it's going to entail. And so we got some initial interest from that. And then we've done this thing every month where once a month we send a slightly tweaked version of the newsletter to our large email list. So that's like everyone we have in our email list that has the right job title in career services. And we send them a version of it that promotes like the top 3 pieces of content that our subscribers have liked in the past. And so that's the intro. And there's a very clear call to action, like subscribe. It's a one-click subscribe button, makes it super easy. And then the rest of the newsletter is similarly formatted to the normal subscriber version. So once a month, that goes out to thousands of people, and that has been very effective in driving more subscribers. And as time went on, we're finding our subscribers are sharing the newsletter with their teams. So if like somebody from the University of Maryland Career Center is a subscriber and they see something in the newsletter that they love, they're forwarding it to their whole team. So we have groups of subscribers from the same institutions. So that's been a key way it has grown. We've also done ads on our own podcast, advertising the newsletter.
I do that too.
Yeah. So yeah, we have ads for the newsletter and the podcast, and then we have podcast episodes in the newsletter. So like it all fits in together.
And we'll start with you, Meredith, just because you're rolling on that, and it sounds like everything is just all flowing and working great. So now I'm going to ask about what challenges you have with it, being on a small team, having to manage a weekly initiative. I see people who can barely manage a quarterly initiative, and you got weekly initiative with the newsletter, and then every other week with the podcast. So what are some challenges that you face with creating the newsletter?
Yeah, it's definitely hard when it all falls on me as the only content marketer and one of a 2-person marketing team. So it's hard to do this every single week. And I'm not going to lie to you. I scheduled today's email last night at 10:30 p.m. Like some weeks it's just like that. So I would say for me, having cadenced content as part of our strategy is really helpful because I need that. I need regular deadlines in order to keep myself on track. I just know that about myself. So having something weekly keeps me accountable. Having a bi-weekly podcast keeps me accountable. I've never missed a day for either of those things. The problem that I run into is balancing the non-cadenced content. It's making time for publishing articles, for example. Like I published one yesterday, and that was the first article we published since March. Like sometimes that stuff just falls through the cracks because I'm one person trying to manage all of this regularly scheduled content. So I'd say that's the biggest challenge. I'm trying to address it by using a freelancer more frequently, but still it's on me to create the creative brief to send to the freelancer and then to review the freelancer's content when it comes in. So I would say it's the non-cadence stuff that sometimes falls through the cracks.
Total journalist style.
Yeah.
I'm the same way.
That's why I did so well in journalism. Daily deadlines, man, kept me on task.
Yeah, if I have deadlines, I'm fine. As long as they're like written somewhere. If somebody asks me to do something and it's not written anywhere, I'll say yes, and they'll come back to me a week later and be like, did you do that? Absolutely not. It has to be documented somewhere with a due date. Yep. It will always get done by the due date. I probably take on too many things with due dates in reality. All right, so Greg, over to you. What would you say from your perspective? So you're managing a very different newsletter. You have significantly more subscribers than either Meredith or I have on our newsletters, which is a good thing, and also a lot of people judging. And so,
it's much more embarrassing when we set out like a that didn't go over well.
Yeah, exactly. So in a very different perspective, where you're doing a lot of crowdsourcing of content, you have a significantly bigger newsletter base. What are some of the challenges that you run into?
This is really the same as Meredith. So my team is also pretty small. I have one main content person. I'm the head of marketing, but I also do a significant amount of the content as well, like podcasting, YouTube. And then I have one HubSpot person and then a VA that helps us. We call her marketing support because she does more than a VA. It's basically like all the hodgepodge things that Greg needs done across the team she handles. But yeah, so similar issues to Meredith, actually. And one of the reasons why we did switch to the wrap up, other than I just thought it was really boring and needed a makeover, it was because we're curating other people's content that kind of solves part of the problem. And if we can analyze that content a bit in a fun and snappy kind of tone of voice, that's a bit irreverent and internet culture, like making fun of stuff, right? Then it like our content still shines and it opens up doors. Like we've shared articles with people and then they reach out to me like, oh, dude, thank you for sharing that. And then that creates a whole partnership with a whole bunch of other stuff. And now they're starting to like write more content for us to share and they become referral partners and they'll be like, blah, blah, blah. So, but in truth, it's really tough. So what Meredith said is right. Like content at like, if you're really good at content, it's a hamster wheel and it's tough. If you're really bad at content, you get off the hamster wheel quick enough because you're probably giving up because no results are happening, right? But it's tough to get around that. So we always look for ways like, how can we do more content with less? Like that's still good, right? That's high quality content. One of those ways was curation. Another way was podcasts. So we actually had the podcast before the YouTube channel, but like if my content is just another guy like giving me content, like asking them questions or he or she, right? That hopefully is a good guest. I've had some really bad guests, so sometimes it's not great. I'm sure you guys have been in that situation as well. Where like, wow, this guy's just really trying to sell his service on this podcast right now. So that's never fun, but that was one of the other ways. Another thing we did to try to get around this was like in my industry, there's a lot of course creators, right? Like how to start e-commerce business, how to learn Facebook.
Oh, they're all in my Instagram feed.
Yes. So so
they're ads.
So this actually leads into one of the biggest challenges I have. But before I get into that, so like one of the things I did, I would reach out to like the legit course creators, make whole modules about buying and selling businesses. So every moment that they do content and promote their course, I get part of that budget because I'm inside the course, right? So I'm technically getting promoted. So that was another way of scaling.
I took an M&A. I actually just disclaimer here. I don't want to shit on these people making these courses because I took one. It was of all the courses I've taken, I took an M&A course. I forget the guy's name. I should probably find it, but it was awesome.
There's a lot of scammy gurus in my niche. So
yeah, there are. So I know I called that out first, but I took one. I learned so much about buying and selling businesses. So courses can be great in some cases as a piece of content that you're either selling or giving away, and in other times
not so much.
They're definitely
you gotta
used as a way to get you to do something else. But yeah, anyway.
So the thing you just said that you're joking about your Instagram. So this is one of the big challenges that I have. And maybe you guys have it too, but I feel like it's extra hard in mine, is like I am talking not to the people who want to make money online, where they have all the hopes and dreams. I'm talking to the people who are making a lot of money online, and a lot of times they're burnt out, don't want to listen to you, right? It's like, This is why they don't like engage. Like there's not like big drives. But like you go to my YouTube channel, like the average video gets like only 150 to like a real big one, maybe 700 views. Like, whoa, Mr. Beast over here. But like those views convert into millions of dollars of revenue, right? It's just like you don't interact. Like they'll never leave a comment or very rarely will. Like I get all the positive comments at the conferences. That's when they're like, "Yeah, I love your stuff." Like, man, I feel like I've been shouting into the void for like the last few months. I wish
throw me a like, man. You know, you can like a YouTube video.
Yeah, exactly. So like, it's just like it's so hard to get them to engage because they're apathetic towards everything because they came up through those scammy gurus and then made the real thing happen, and now they're like several echelons levels of higher, and they are so sick of getting marketed to all the time, which is one of the big reasons I went with like just be weird as like our marketing mantra. So like that's why I bought a billboard. So I've done a lot of weird stuff to like just make people laugh. I remember
where did you buy a billboard?
I was in Chiang Mai, Thailand. So like that's like kind of the digital nomad capital, and that was a big part of our clientele was digital nomads, right? So I knew my competitor was coming and I wanted to make sure he knew this was our land. So I bought a billboard right in front of the conference and I gave a speech, and I didn't realize how cheap advertising in Thailand was because I thought I bought the billboard for like a week. I bought it for like 3 months. Whoops. It was in Thai. I don't read Thai. But then I got so many like people posting on Instagram or LinkedIn or shooting me a message on Facebook like, wow, man, I just started my digital nomad career. The first thing I see in Chiang Mai, the mecca of digital nomads, is empire flippers. Welcome to Chiang Mai. Sell your business with me. Like, this really is the capital of digital nomads. There's the EF side. So it all worked out, right? But yeah,
like if I go to Chiang Mai, like, am I going to see your face?
Now.
Like, do you just live there now?
It's gone now. But there are a bunch of people walking around with EF shirts. I think it was at that same conference at a guy. He was like, oh man, I thought I was talking to one of your teammates, but it turns out he's just like one of your customers. Like, oh, well, like what? How did the conversation go? He's like, well, I saw him wearing the Empire Flipper shirt, and I asked him like, oh, how's it like working with Greg? And the guy's like, oh, I don't work with them. I'm a customer. I've been retired for years. They gave me the shirt after I sold the business.
Nice.
Like, what a testimonial. So there's a bunch of people in Chiang Mai walking around with Empire Flipper shirts. So, but yeah, that's my hardest thing. Is just my niche tends to be more apathetic.
And the last thing I have here, you both go to a bunch of conferences. So we're getting close to time, but I do just want, let's just, because we've spent so much time focused on the newsletter, let's just talk a little bit about how you parlay some of the content work that you're doing into some of the work that you do at conferences. So Greg, I'll start with you. I know conferences are a big piece of your marketing stack or just initiatives and where you spend money and what you go do. So talk a little bit about how you're taking some of the things that you're doing on the content side, making them come to life when you go and see people in person.
Yeah, so like I'll usually do some kind of content related to the conference I'm going to that I know is going to be emailed out to the list, because I know there's going to be people on my newsletter at that conference, right? Then if I'm speaking, which I almost always try to get a speaking spot, even if I have to pay for it, which most of the time I don't, but sometimes you have to pay to play. And I do that specifically because in my niche is like, okay, you just spent 10 years building this thing that represents like 80% or more of your entire net worth. Why don't you trust me and let me help you get rid of it, right? There's a lot of trust that has to be built in this kind of conversation, right? And speaking gives you a little bit of that authority. And usually I try to record those speeches. So we'll use it in YouTube as well. Like we just published one that I just did actually in front of 400 SEOs, which went decently well. So we'll try to use that. And then, so that's the main stuff we do in terms of how we try to like lead it back into the content stack. But similar to the sales thing I just was talking about earlier, like conferences are great. I treat them like middle of funnel. Like people are already like pretty serious about the thing if they bought a ticket to come to the conference, right? So they're a little bit further ahead, but you can get a lot of good pulse like what's going on in the industry in there. So a lot of our TWIMA content comes from like what I learned from people like at the bar at the conference with the other attendees, right? Just the trends that they're talking about, the fears they have, the anxiety. Marketers, we love to play on anxieties. So like it's always good to get a little bit of those going for our next EDA campaign, right? So yeah, that's like the quick 30 seconds of how I use it in my content stack. And really, I try to get everyone in the conference to come and view our content. So I use that as a bridge, like, oh, maybe I will join up with this TWIMA letter. I met this weirdo Greg. He seemed cool. I wonder what their newsletter is about.
And Meredith, for you, so you are content creation as your focus. You go to the conference itself. What are some of the goals that you have at the conference? Is it content creation? Is it shaking hands and kissing babies? Like, what do you focus on when you're there?
A little of both. So, yeah. Anytime we've gone, or I have gone to like an industry conference, or in last year's case, we hosted a Career Everywhere roadshow conference in Boston.
Oh,
and
awesome.
Usually, yeah. And I got to MC that, so that was fun. And most everyone there knew who I was at that point. So it was like a familiar face emceeing the event. And typically I go in with like one content creation project. I'm not trying to do everything. It's just not possible. So in the past, that has looked like getting testimonials from customers, because I can shoot and edit video. So I'll do all of that. So I've done customer testimonials at the Career Everywhere conference. I did just a quick cut kind of video where I just interviewed people and I said, what does Career Everywhere mean to you? And I cut all their answers together. That video now lives on our website. At the conference that's coming. Yeah. At the conference coming up in June, I am again going to be doing some video interviews, and it's going to be very focused on like how does Uconnect help you tell your story, and that will tie into the Career Everywhere movement. So typically there's one small project like that, but a lot of it, especially this upcoming conference, is going to be very relational.
Yeah.
It's me meeting people that subscribe to the newsletter and listen to the podcast and have joined our new digital community that we launched earlier this year. It's going to be trying to get people to participate in those things if they don't already. Like we've created postcards that we'll hand out and a one-pager that we have that's like 3 ways to participate in Career Everywhere. And it's subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, join the community. And there's a QR code that goes to a landing page with all of those things. Yes, it's a little bit of both, but yeah, in general, it's just going to be a fun opportunity for me to meet the people that I've already been interacting with virtually.
Conferences are great for that. Like
I'm so excited.
Yeah. Like I forgot to mention the other thing I do on content, just real quick. Like anyone that sponsors the event, I'm sure you probably do something similar, Meredith. But like anyone else that sponsors the same event I'm at, I always try to like, instead of getting new customers, I try to build a relationship with that person because like, hey, they already have an audience. Like, let's do some collaboration, right? So that's another quick thing I bring from conference and back into the content stack.
Yeah, something I hear a lot about too is I try to dissuade people from recording podcasts at conferences. I come from a video production background. I'm like,
No.
You don't know. I'm like, you don't know what you're asking me. But they're like, no, it's cool. Like they're all gonna be there. I'm like, okay, do you have like a room, do you have AV equipment? You usually do this remote? So now, do you have a Zoom recorder to split your mics? Like, you're gonna have mic bleed? Are you gonna send me something that sounds absolutely horrendous? But one of the things that I do, it is a great opportunity to recruit guests for the future. I know something that, I don't know as much about your podcast, Greg, but Meredith, you haven't missed a recording. You do 2 podcasts, one for UConnect and this one with me. But a lot of people really struggle with getting guests and staying consistent with their content and if you go to a conference, you have all your guests are right there. Go tell them you want to have them on the show. You don't need to do it there. And then you can like book out 3, 4, 5 months of content with people that you can collaborate with. So, and another thing just for me is just, it's so cool. I've heard this story so many times of just the content creation piece, whether it's podcast, newsletter, but really like getting your face out there in your space, and then the positive reception at conferences. I have a client who she came back from her first conference after the pandemic. She runs a podcast in the restaurant space. They're a restaurant tech company. And she was like, I was like a celebrity there. It was crazy. Like I didn't even know people really listened to it. And it's just a really cool thing to hear. We are coming up on time. So Greg, I want to ask you, where can people go to find you and to find Empire Flippers?
Yeah, so just empireflippers.com if you want to check out what we're selling or if you want to sell a business. Always happy to help if I can. If you want to reach out to me personally, it's just greg@empireflippers.com, or you can add me on LinkedIn. Or if you're not afraid of some bad poetry, you can always add me on Facebook too. I moonlight as a novelist, so if you enjoy that, you can become my friend on Facebook as well.
You have to tell me if somebody does like comment and they're like, I heard you on Tech Qualified. I came here for the poetry.
This was a quick aside. So there's this guy, he sold I think it was a $1.3 million business with us. We got him an amazing deal super quick. Like I asked him, I've been talking to him for years, like, dude, why did you finally like decide to submit? He's like, honestly, I see your poetry and I like it. And I always associate you with Empire Flippers. So it just was always been stuck in my mind.
So
I messaged the co-founder that hired me, like, see, Justin, $1 million poet over here, like move over, William Blake. Here comes Greg Elfrink.
Maybe
I hope you got some commission from that.
Yeah. Let's get some poetry in the newsletter. I want to hear how that gets responded to by 118,000 people.
You want to be
do
a
a
better
haiku.
BD
I'm sure
marketer.
there will be
Do Victorian literature.
All right. Well, Greg, it was great having you on. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. It was great having you on Tech Qualified.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks for checking out Tech Qualified. This show is brought to you by New North, a marketing agency that helps turn your small, scrappy marketing team into a growth engine. To find out more about New North or check out more episodes of this show, go to newnorth.com/techqualified.